During this presentation, there will be two questions that will be looked at. The first is, what was the importance of ratifying the 13th Amendment? And secondly, how did Abraham Lincoln overcome Congress to include the 13th Amendment to be a part of the U.S. Constitution? The answer to the first question was the abolishment of slavery. That is the reason for the 13th Amendment. Everyone should know this, but many do not in our country. There is more to this, though, more to just slavery. It was an idea to bring a divided nation back together, to bring an end to a war that would almost destroy America. It was what would put this country and its people into an era of Reconstruction, a time Lincoln himself would eventually not come to see. Now, the head of the McCombs History Department, Professor Elton Wines, speaks about the reasons behind the amendment and why Lincoln sought to improve the view on the Civil War to the American public. This is his view on the question.
When we look at the 13th Amendment, we have to look back as to why this war is being fought in the first place. Obviously, when this war begins in 1861, this is a war to preserve the Union. It's in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation, which is really a military necessity, where Lincoln frees the slaves, and I use that term loosely because legally he can't free anyone in these areas in revolt, that this now takes on a more moralistic or ethical sort of picture. So as a result, the war then morphs from a war to preserve the Union to the freeing of the slaves. Now, when this war concludes, the question is going to remain whether or not we are going to permanently free the slaves. And I believe Lincoln at that point in time wanted to make sure that this was going to be permanent. Hence why he pushed Congress early in 1965 to pass an amendment, or to at least send one to the states to be ratified, to then abolish slavery forever.
Lincoln realized that it was wasteful to wage such a bloody war without plans to eliminate slavery. In September of 1862, following the Union victory at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves in territory still in rebellion on January 1st, 1863 would be declared forever free. The move was largely symbolic, as it only freed slaves in areas outside of the Union control. But it changed the conflict from a war for the unification of the states to a war whose objectives included the destruction of slavery. Lincoln believed that a constitutional amendment was necessary to ensure the end of slavery. In 1864, Congress debated several proposals. Some insisted on including provisions to prevent discrimination against blacks, but the Senate Judiciary Committee provided the eventual language. It borrowed from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, when slavery was banned from the area north of the Ohio River. The Northwest Ordinance, officially titled An Ordinance for the Government of the Territory of the United States Northwest of the Ohio River, was adopted by the Confederation Congress on July 13, 1787. The Northwest Ordinance established a government for the Northwest Territory, outlined the process for admitting a new state to the Union, and guaranteed that newly created states would be equal to the original 13 states. Considered one of the most important legislative acts of the Confederation Congress, the Northwest Ordinance also perfected civil liberties and outlawed slavery in the new territories. This is why the development of the Western territories was such a problem for the growing country, because the southern states wanted some to be slave states, while the ordinance stated otherwise. During the second half, the second question would be, how did Abraham Lincoln get the amendment to pass Congress? The first step was done on April 8, 1864, which the Senate passed the 13th Amendment by a vote of 38-6. And on June 15, 1864, the House of Representatives initially defeated the 13th Amendment by a vote of 93 in favor, 65 opposed, and 23 who did not vote. That is less than the two-thirds majority needed to pass a constitutional amendment. Now finally, January 31st, 1865, the House of Representatives passed the 13th Amendment by a vote of 119 to 56. On February 1st, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln signed a joint resolution submitting the proposed 13th Amendment to the states. And finally, on December 18, 1865, Secretary of State William Seward issued a statement verifying the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Now, the first to ratify was Illinois, because they wanted Abraham Lincoln's home state to be the first to acknowledge the president's achievements. The final state to ratify was Mississippi. The United States Constitutional Amendment required ratification from 3/4 of the nation's states. However, what about the state of Mississippi? Well, apparently they just forgot about the state. It recently became known that Mississippi had not yet formally ratified the 13th Amendment. Mississippi was one of the original 4 states to reject ratification of the amendment in 1865 after they declared it unconstitutional, and they apparently just never got around to submitting the official paperwork when they decided to ratify it. This misstep became public when University of Mississippi Medical Center professor Dr. Rajan Batra looked into the matter. After seeing Spielberg's film Lincoln, Dr. Batra became curious and decided to research the ratification process in Mississippi. While doing this, he found that the Mississippi State Legislature eventually voted to approve the amendment in 1995, but that this legislation was again never sent to the office of the Federal Register and therefore never made official. Dr. Batra then took steps to gain formal ratification of the 13th Amendment on February 7, 2013.